Welcome back to the podcast. Today we've got another fantastic guest on. So she is a clinical professor in psychiatry and behavioral sciences, and she is also a sleep expert. Norah Simpson. Norah, how are you
Hello.
today?
Good, great, happy to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on today. As I was saying before, followed your work for a while and followed you on previous podcasts. And yeah, you have an array of knowledge in sleep. And as a coach that tells his clients to get more sleep, this is going to be a great episode for them to listen to as well. So Norah, if I didn't cover it there, do you just want to give a brief sort of overview of yourself and how you got here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I am a clinical psychologist. My background in my graduate studies was actually in experimental sleep deprivation. So, helped run different studies looking at exactly how not getting enough sleep can impact you. I was particularly interested in impacts on health because we all know that getting enough sleep is important for health. And later on, began to do more clinical work, helping people who actually can't sleep. So they have insomnia disorder or other difficulties with their sleep, learn to sleep better without the use of medications or drugs.
Great, fantastic. And what got you into that field to begin with then?
It actually was relatively by chance. So I was really interested in the relationship between stress and health, and was thinking of focusing my work and training in that area. But due to some logistical factors, shifts in the department where I was in school, I ended up making the leap into sleep. And I wasn't sure at that point kind of how permanent that change would be. But the more I learned about sleep, the more interested I became, and the more I learned that there were just not enough people doing this type of work and getting the word out. So, I don't know how many years it's been now, but I'm still here and I'm still eager to keep learning more about sleep.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great. I think I first started really delving into sleep when the podcast with Joe Rogan and Matthew Walker came out, which I'm sure you
Hmm.
would have watched and most people would have studied. And that's when it started to go a little bit mainstream for me anyway. People started to read into it. And since then, I've really delved into it. And the difference that a good night's sleep makes for everything in your life is like night and day, right? When you say you have 6 hours sleep compared to 9, everything for me changes, right? Like I need like 9 hours sleep. If I get less than like 6, then just don't talk to me, don't come near me. I'm one of those people, right? And I think a lot of, especially in like the business world, there's that conventional thinking that you should sleep when you're dead, right? And the more hours that you
Hmm.
work, the more that you do, the more sleep you sacrifice, the further you're going to get in life. And from personal experience and from working with clients, I mean, that couldn't really be further from the truth, could it?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with this cultural piece. I mean, I think this is changing, I think, a bit in recent years, but there really has been this idea that being able to function well on little sleep is like a badge of honor. It's like, you're toughing it out, you can do the work even with very little sleep. And that actually is a little bit dangerous because we know that you can't actually do the work as well when you're not sleeping enough. And so really is a paradigm shift to start thinking about prioritizing sleep, whether you're doing it for health or whether you're doing it for really optimal performance.
Yeah, for sure. And I've read a lot around kind of sleep deprivation, what it can do. I mean, what are some of the big things that you see for people that kind of the negatives for people that are continually sleep deprived and underslept for kind of their body, their minds, their overall lifestyle?
Yeah, well, sleep is a very reinforcing area to do research because most of the time, if you look for a relationship between sleep and some other important domain of life, you can find a relationship. So there are documented relationships where when we sleep deprive people, their cognitive performance is impaired, their memory is impaired, their learning is impaired. not sleeping enough affects your immune function. So you're more susceptible to developing a cold if exposed to the virus. Your vaccine response is lower. And this is certainly something that has a lot of relevance in sort of our current pandemic era. But sleep is also very important for mood regulation. So if you're sleep deprived, you have more negative emotions and fewer positive emotions, and your ability to really regulate those emotions are different. Your appetite changes, right? It's harder to regulate weight when you're underslept. So really almost everywhere you look, you can see these relationships that have been tested in very well controlled laboratory studies.
Yeah, for sure. And there's an array there. I think one of the biggest eye openers for me is the Alzheimer's one, right? You know, if you're underslept for a long time, that's like one of the biggest determinants of getting Alzheimer's, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, so that relationship is really, I think, one that we are learning more about. There are definitely um, known relationships now between sleep and what's called the glymphatic system, which is, people call it different things, kind of like the kind of garbage trash can system of the brain, where only at night when you're asleep does the system come online and start to clear away some of the neural waste and debris. And we know this neural debris or plaques in the brain is also associated with um, dementia like processes. But there are also findings that people who have dementia processes have sleep disturbances. So really kind of thinking about, if I don't sleep enough, I'm going to get Alzheimer's or be greater risk for dementia. I think the relationship is not quite as clear, and it can be almost frightening to think about it like that. Clearly sleep is very important. I'm the biggest proponent of that. But, I think if you're someone who's in a position of actually having difficulty getting the sleep that you need, that can be one of the scariest things to think about.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess as well with the body, there's kind of the testosterone there. And I know for my audience that mainly guys that like doing weight training, kind of guys that, yeah, want to make sure their testosterone is at a good level. Sleep can really impair that. So what really happens to the body when, yeah, we don't get enough sleep and the link with testosterone?
So we do know that when you are sleeping, there are a lot of regulatory processes that happen in your body when it is more offline. It's a time for recovery and repair, and there are a lot of different hormones that are regulated during that time. And when you're not getting enough sleep, you really compromise your body's ability to do those regulatory processes. And you can see changes in a number of different physiological outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. That's crazy. And I guess one of my biggest questions is, fitting sleep routines into a busy lifestyle, because one of the biggest issues for especially the audience that are listening, professionals, sort of high level execs, is they're working late at night. There's that blue light coming into their eyes. It's the constant emails coming through, the anxiety of, what's coming on tomorrow. And we're living in like a 24/7 world. And when you compare that to where we were, 10, 20, 30 years ago, it just was never like that. We were never bombarded this much with information and blue light, which is like looking into the sun at the middle of the night, right? It's just awful for your eyes and general sleep. So, from the people that you know and that you worked with, what kind of advice do you give to busy people that are working late to kind of help optimize their sleep?
Yeah. So, I think there's a big picture answer and kind of a more detail oriented answer. And the big picture is that, you may need, and this is hard to hear and hard to say, you may need to make some trade offs at different points, right? So sometimes it comes down to a math equation, right? So if you're really an 8 hour sleeper and you are working and allowing yourself kind of only kind of 7 to 8 hours a night to sleep or get ready for sleep or to set the stage for good sleep, you know the balance is not tipped in your favor, right? So sometimes there are some value-oriented decisions that need to be made about really how you want to approach this. Some people don't necessarily have those choices open to them. They have the work, they need to do it for a variety of reasons. They may be prioritizing different things. They may have to do it to earn a paycheck. And in those situations, you want to think about really what you can do. And so, one of the things to think about when we think about blue light is how you can minimize your exposures. So, there are programs that you can install on your computer, like Flux, that dims the screen and changes the sort of spectrum of the light, so there's less blue light exposure reaching your eyes. There's also now, particularly in the pandemic world, a whole line and range of blue blocking glasses that you can wear. There are very basic, not particularly fashionable ones that are very inexpensive, available on Amazon, that you can wear when you're doing work if you need to minimize your blue light exposure. But the other thing that's really important is giving yourself at least some time to disengage from work, from screens, from technology before you want to go to sleep, to really allow your body the required time to transition from being fully engaged in daytime mode, oftentimes with bright light exposure, to being in a mind and body state that's really conducive to a good night's sleep. Your brain doesn't work like a light switch in terms of how it regulates daytime versus nighttime. There really has to be some opportunity to really transition between those two states for you to be expecting yourself to be working your best during the day and getting your best sleep at night.
For sure. I think that's a great point you touched on there regarding kind of tapering off that, blue light throughout the course of the night, because it's not just going to happen straight away. It's going to take a while for you to kind of go into that relaxed state. And I typically find having things like a shower, which I know is good to kind of heat your brain up before you go to sleep, to
Mhm.
let it cool back down. That can help. Things like chamomile tea, reading, even, having a Kindle in bed. For me personally, that's been great because there's no blue light from the Kindle. I can read,
Mhm.
and that really sets my brain off, especially if you read fiction. I found, I don't know about you, but
Mhm.
reading fiction at night really helps me.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really nice example of learning what works for you, and I think you have a lot of great suggestions there. People can do all sorts of things. Some people will do kind of an evening yoga or stretching routine. Some people have some music they like to listen to that they find relaxing. It doesn't necessarily matter exactly what you're doing as long as you're setting the intention to have some time to unwind and you're doing something that works for you.
Yeah, for sure. And I think bio individuality is very important there, right? There's going to be different ways in which people can do things,
Mhm.
which we're a big proponent of. Great. I guess the next question I had was regarding naps in the middle of the day. So, a lot of the guys listening to this, maybe family men and women that have young kids, and getting 8 hours sleep at night is just not going to happen for them.
Mhm.
However, I've heard that you potentially can have things like naps in the middle of the day to kind of help with boosting sleep. Now, I know that there's things such as sleep cycles, and if we kind of wake up in the middle of that, it can be bad for us and potentially negative. So, what's your advice on kind of naps in the middle of the day, and how should people really do it
Mhm.
effectively?
Yeah, so naps can absolutely be a useful part of someone's sleep routine. Big picture, again, starting with the big picture. So, big picture, if you're sleeping well at night, then naps can be a good way to balance your sleep if you're not able to get enough sleep at night. If you're not getting enough sleep at night because you're having difficulty sleeping, then naps often serve to perpetuate the problem. So you want to first make sure that you're in a place where you're actually sleeping well during the times that you have given yourself to sleep. If you're just in a position where, look, you sleep pretty well, but you can't get enough sleep at night because of whatever responsibilities you have during the day, if you can fit a nap in during the day, it can be helpful. The things you want to think about, from my perspective, are how long you're going to be sleeping. So, If you're really just looking to take the edge off your fatigue or your sleepiness, and you're not trying to catch up on sleep during the day, then taking a short nap is actually the most effective. So, sleeping 10, 15 minutes has pretty big benefits on alertness and performance and doesn't have the trade offs that we associate with sleeping longer durations during the day. As scientists, we call this sleep inertia. And most of us who have taken a nap during the day have experienced this. It's that kind of groggy, sometimes nauseous feeling that you get when you wake up from a longer nap. And those feelings can last up to an hour sometimes, and they are associated with not only feeling worse, but also impaired performance at the same time. So you want to be thoughtful if you're taking longer naps about planning them so that you can give yourself some time to wake up afterwards before expecting yourself to really be at peak levels of performance. So from my perspective, that's really one of the biggest things to consider when you're looking at the option of taking daytime naps.
Sure. So what you're saying there is kind of the duration of the nap is probably more important. Is that kind of what you're saying? So you're finding the 10 to 15-minute shorter naps are potentially going to give you less fatigue afterwards compared to kind of the longer duration naps.
So that's true. If you're really only able to sleep for 5 hours a night, for example, and you have the opportunity to take a longer nap during the day, you may choose to do that, but you need to be thoughtful about kind of planning this period where you're really going to be both offline while you're sleeping, but also in a transition stage kind of immediately upon awakening. So the naps you can think of in two different ways. The short naps are great, when you haven't quite slept enough, you're trying to take the edge off your sleepiness, you're trying to get kind of a power boost. People call these power naps for a reason. Those short naps can be really effective. When you're habitually not able to get enough sleep at night due to scheduling factors, we see this a lot when people are doing different types of shift work or working two jobs or working and training for something athletically. You might need to actually have a second sleep period during the day. We call that a nap because that's what we do. But if you have that kind of longer length of sleep, then you really need to be kind of thoughtful about giving yourself some time to wake up after those longer sleep periods.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess with the modern lifestyle as well, trying to find that time to have rest period after sleeping for the second time can be quite difficult. So
Hmm.
it makes sense, like you said, to have those shorter ones which you can recover quicker from and get back to your normal routine,
Hmm.
which makes lots of sense. That's great. And another big thing that I really talk a lot about with my clients is caffeine, right? And the effect that
Hmm.
caffeine has on sleep. And I think, isn't it between 0 or 6 hours prior to bedtime, if you're consuming caffeine, that can really reduce your sleep duration, I believe. Is that right?
Absolutely. So the half-life of caffeine is 4 to 6 hours kind of on average, but it can be a lot longer for some people. So 0 to 6, I would say, is, probably on the narrow range. We generally recommend to minimize impact on sleep that you don't have caffeine after lunch. But if you need to have some in the afternoon, just try to have that be as early as possible. If you're using caffeine as a kind of athletic performance enhancement to training and you're doing it in the evening, you really need to be careful about impact on sleep at night and sleep quality because you will have caffeine, which is a stimulant on board in your system when you're trying to go to sleep that night.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always recommend to my clients to, consume caffeine, like you said, before 12 p.m. in the morning, if you need that little kick. And I know
Mhm.
that guys that are dieting, especially, it can be hard to not eat. So having a bit of caffeine can suppress the appetite. However, if you're, relying on that too much and it gets close to bed, you're then going to ruin that sleep, and then you're going to
Mhm.
wake up sleep deprived, then you're going to want to eat more, and you go into
Mhm.
that vicious downward spiral. So that's a great point. And what would your advice be to guys that are potentially training in the evening and need that kind of stimulation to train, but are kind of worried about caffeine, would you say reduce the caffeine intake, or what would your advice be to them?
It's really a personal choice. A lot of these decisions really require you to identify your priorities. And if you really think that you need caffeine to train in the way that you want to, you just really need to be thoughtful about how you're going to get enough sleep or how you're going to take care of your sleep in that context. One of the things that I think is important to think about with caffeine is that people really can develop a tolerance to the impact of caffeine. So using it as a performance or a training enhancer really requires strategic use of caffeine so you don't develop a tolerance. So sometimes people get stuck in this position where they feel like they really need the caffeine and they're using caffeine in a way that's interfering with their sleep. But if you really get down to it, they're not using caffeine strategically enough as a performance enhancer anyways. So if you're drinking a lot of caffeine every night and during the day, you may not actually be getting the performance enhancement that you think that you are. So it really requires some careful thought about how you want to approach that.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I think a lot of people are very reliant on caffeine. And like you said, it's the law of diminishing returns when it comes to the effects, right? Because
Mhm.
you're taking it all the time, you're not really going to get that much stimulation. Whereas, let's say you kind of taper that caffeine down, and then
Mhm.
you've got a competition or you've got a very big training day, and you kind of bring that back up, and then
Mhm.
you peak for that. That is fantastic, right? Because you're getting those benefits then, and you're really feeling that your training is going to see the difference. But kind of taking it consecutively every day is very bad. And since that, I've reduced my caffeine intake to, I think it's 1 cup a day before 12.
Okay.
My sleep quality has been fantastic. I mean, my aura ring loves me now, right? It's great. So I think caffeine's a really good point. I guess another one is kind of, on the extreme side of things, and like stress and insomnia. And
Mhm.
that's something that's maybe not so mainstream, but specific people suffer from. And I know you're kind of an expert in that area. So what are sort of, yeah, what is insomnia first and foremost for people that don't know?
Mhm. So insomnia is difficulty falling or staying asleep despite giving yourself plenty of opportunity to do so, so that you're really not getting as much sleep as you need and you're really feeling the impact of that during the day. So, in some ways, it is a bit of a subjective definition. We do say, it should take you kind of 30 minutes or longer to fall asleep, or you need to be awake for more than 30 minutes at night to really think about this meeting criteria for an insomnia disorder. But, there are some people who, their sleep objectively may not look that great, but they're not bothered by it during the day. And so, therefore, they wouldn't meet criteria for having an insomnia disorder, right? So, you need to have disrupted sleep and you need to be suffering some consequences of that during the day. It really actually is relatively common. So, 1 in 10 people meet criteria for insomnia disorder. Oftentimes, it's underdiagnosed and undertreated because people aren't really aware that there are effective treatments if you're not able to sleep well.
For sure. So no, that's great. And I think the fact that you said 1 in 10 there, that's more popular than I thought, which is quite crazy. What are some of the kind of procedures or some of the strategies that you use to help people with insomnia that you find that are very effective? And I know it's probably a case by case basis, but I guess there are some things that you probably find out there that's very useful.
Yeah. So the the gold standard treatment right now for insomnia is called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI for short. And it's a whole set of different tools that are used together to retrain sleep patterns and to give individuals different strategies to help them quiet their mind at night. And you're right that you're individualized, but there are some things that people can absolutely do on their own to try to help any sleep problems that they're having. And these are things, some of them we've talked about already, like giving yourself time to wind down and disengage from the day, right? Having a very active mind, you're thinking about the day that you just had, you're thinking about all the things that you need to do the next day, you're kind of doom scrolling on your phone when you get into bed. And, these are not really setting the stage for a relaxing night of sleep. So, giving yourself the opportunity to set yourself up well for that night of sleep is really important. Another thing, which is really hard for people to do in practice, but I'll mention it here just because I think it's very relevant, is no one knows how to make you sleep at any point. You can't try your hardest and make yourself sleep if your body is not ready to fall asleep. So, if you're having trouble with sleep, if you're awake at night and tossing and turning, lying in bed, trying to sleep, trying to make yourself sleep, all of these things actually are ineffective and only serve to really wake your brain up and get you stuck in this cycle of insomnia. If you can't fall asleep, the best thing to do is really just sit up in bed and read a book, a paper book, or a Kindle that doesn't have a big backlight on it until you start to feel sleepy. And at that point, put it away and give yourself the chance to fall asleep. Really engaging in this struggle with sleep when you're having problems. I totally get it. This is how we fix problems as people. If something isn't working, we try our darndest to get it done. But for sleep, that really isn't how it works.
Yeah, I can really relate to that last point because when I used to struggle to sleep, I kept thinking and trying to force myself to sleep. And it's actually the most counterintuitive thing you can do because you're tensing yourself up, you're getting more stressed. It's actually
Hmm.
waking your brain and your body up. You start sweating and you're like, wow, I've just made this situation a whole lot worse. So
Hmm.
I like that idea of, yeah, letting your body and your mind go to sleep when it wants to. And I think a big part of that is, like you said before, that routine of setting yourself up, right? A lot of the
Hmm.
things that I try and tell my clients as well is just have a good sleep routine, whether that is shower, whether that's reading, whether that is your own meditation ritual, anything at all. Just make sure that it's conducive to trying to aid the sleep.
Hmm.
I know that another thing that's been very useful for myself personally has been that supplementation as like an additional tool to help sleep.
Hmm.
So I've been using glycine and ZMAs as a kind of pre-sleep ritual to kind of help me go to sleep. And I've been finding the glycine's been helping me kind of fall asleep a little bit quicker, and it helps me have these crazy dreams. Like whenever I take some glycine, I'm like flying around in unicorns over the sea, chasing some next villain around. It's absolutely crazy. So I know that I'm getting into those latter stages of sleep with that, and those lucid dreams, which are really good. Um, what is your kind of opinion on sleep supplements, especially kind of glycine and ZMAs?
So, my position on supplements is that if you can sleep well without supplements, it's probably best. I know that's a very square approach to sleep, but especially in the United States, supplements are not strictly regulated. You don't necessarily know exactly what you're getting when you take it. And with anything that you take for sleep, there is always the risk of tolerance and dependence so that it can lose efficacy over time. So, anytime that you're relying on something external to help you sleep well, you're always vulnerable to it stopping working at some point. And so, from my perspective, if you can develop a sleep routine that works for you, that you can do on your own anywhere, whether you kind of packed all your supplements or medications with you or not, is the win. Again, this is a personal choice. A lot of people use different supplements for sleep. Many people use melatonin for sleep, at least in the US. Um, and, I think over time we'll have more and more data about exactly how some of these newer supplements are impacting sleep. So for now, I'm a little more conservative on that front. But absolutely, supplements for sleep is a huge market, and there's lots of different things out there that people try.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm always an advocate as well of getting the basics and the foundations down before you even think about supplementation. You know, the same with kind of what I preach for your health and fitness. You should always have your training, you should have your nutrition, you should have your sleep down before you look at muscle building supplements or creatine, for instance, or the next pre-workout. It's very important to have that kind of natural, like you said, square approach to everything to build the foundation. And then supplements can add as an aid. And I know that from speaking to a guest on the last podcast who's based in Canada, he was saying how badly regulated supplements can be and the quality of supplements there are, right? Because especially in the US, you can get some really cheap stuff, magnesium, and some very high grade stuff. And there can be a huge difference in the quality and actual effects that it gives you. So I'm glad that you touched on that point. That's really important. I also wanted to talk about kind of food before bed as well, because that can be a big problem for people, right? A reason why they can't sleep is due to digestion issues. And I always try and stick to kind of high fiber foods before I go to bed, stay away from sugars, and make sure there's like a nice, decent gap between the time that I have my last meal and going to bed, because you don't want to be digesting that food. So what's kind of your experience of kind of food intake, and what do you recommend for people before they go to sleep and eating?
Yeah, so there's a lot in there. And I think I liked the way that you describe sort of spacing out your last meal in bed. I mean, it doesn't really make sense to eat a big meal and in essence give your body a big job to break down all that food and then say, oh wait, now I actually want you to go to bed, right? You can get more acid reflux. It can make sleep harder. And so, you know, if possible, it's a good idea to space out your last meal 3 to 4 hours before bed, so you have a chance to get most of that digestion done before you go to bed. There is some nuance there, though. So if you are having difficulty sleeping, there's some data that having a small carbohydrate-based snack in the last half hour before bed can actually help you fall asleep more quickly.
Okay.
So that's something to consider. And there are also some situations where people are training for a particular event or trying to change or reduce their weight, where they may be restricting their caloric intake to some extent intentionally during the day, but that can sometimes have an impact on sleep at night, because you can actually wake feeling hungry or wake due to feeling hungry. And so you want to be thoughtful if you are not sleeping well and you are on a kind of calorie restricted diet, to make sure that you're kind of timing your intake so you're not having your sleep actually disrupted by hunger.
Yeah, that's a great point regarding the guys that are potentially dieting or girls that are dieting and waking up in the middle of the night and being really hungry, because that's happened to me before. Is I've been dieting pretty low calories, and then I wake up in the middle of the night, like 5 a.m. before, like a few hours before my alarm, and I'm like, damn, this is not good, right? Like,
Right.
I need some food. And I know that kind of guys that do kind of extreme bodybuilding, that kind of thing, can experience that too. So I always find that the sweet spot is usually a big meal kind of 2-3 hours before potentially. And I try and stay away from sugars. But what you said there regarding the carb-based snack, that's really interesting. So with that, is there kind of specific amounts there that people should be eating or consuming, or is that kind of quite ambiguous at the minute?
It is. I mean, there's one or two studies that have shown that this is effective or can be, but they haven't done the type of studies where they say, okay, if you eat X amount, it's optimal, but if you eat 2X that amount, it actually interferes with sleep. So, you know, usually people will do something like eat a banana or a little bowl of cereal or a piece of fruit or a couple of crackers. You know, in practice, that's what you see people doing when you give them that recommendation, and then they come back and tell you that it was helpful for them.
For sure. That's quite healthy food as well, or stuff that will maybe digest a little bit better than, say, some Haribo. So I'd probably say opt for some healthy food before you go to bed. That should be great. Awesome. And I know that going into kind of sleep, affecting sleep is alcohol, right? And
Mm.
I know my audience, they like to go out on the weekend, have a few drinks with work or their buddies. And I think it's a good thing to incorporate into your life as long as you've got balance. But I know that that can negatively affect your sleep. So
Mhm.
what are kind of your views, and from the research you've studied, the amount of alcohol that will have a negative impact on sleep compared to just maybe one or two?
Mhm. So a lot of that actually depends on timing and things like body mass. So from a basic perspective, we know that the initial effects of alcohol are sedating, right? Sometimes people use alcohol actually as a sleep aid, which I would not recommend for reasons we'll talk about in a minute, because it actually can help you fall asleep more quickly. The downside is that as your body breaks down that alcohol, the metabolites of the alcohol are actually a central nervous system stimulant. And so you see sleep is disrupted, sleep architecture, so that pattern of sleep cycles that happen over the night is also altered, and sleep quality in general is poor. If you consume a lot of alcohol, which some of us have done at various points in our life, you can see how significant that impact can be if you fall asleep very quickly, but then you have a period where you just kind of are awake in the middle of the night, and it's clearly not time to be done with sleep, but you just find yourself awake. That's happening as the kind of stimulatory effects of that alcohol breakdown product is in your body, and it's really activating you. So in answer to your question, the very basic recommendation is similar to food. So avoid alcohol consumption in the last 3 to 4 hours before bed. For social consumption, that tends to be impractical for many of us. So this idea of drinking in moderation, is in fact the recommended strategy. Um, it's hard to say kind of exactly where you're going to start to see a negative impact on your sleep. Um, Although I will say that in my experience, some people, and I don't think it's a huge majority of people, are actually very sensitive to the impact of alcohol on sleep. So if you find that you're someone who drinks more regularly, it can be interesting to do an experiment where you actually don't have any alcohol at all in the evening for a week and look at the impact on your sleep. That doesn't mean that you can't drink in the evening, but it does allow you to make a more educated decision about how you want to approach alcohol and timing of alcohol consumption.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point regarding timing. And I'd also say the duration of time that you don't drink as well. So from personal experience, I found that when after I think it's 2 weeks of not touching alcohol at all, my sleep really starts to improve, and I can really
Mhm.
see noticeable differences in sleep quality, duration, less restfulness in the middle of the night. It's really kind of, again, night and day. But for the first week, it's kind of still the same. It takes my body a while to maybe flush out the toxins or whatever the
Mhm.
alcohol's causing that's interfering with my sleep. Is that something that you've known of before or that you've experienced?
So, for alcohol, thinking of moderate consumption patterns, we shouldn't see kind of that longitudinal of an impact. But what I would say is that it can take about 2 weeks sometimes to see the positive impact of some of the smaller changes that you make in your sleep over time, right? So 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, is not going to feel too different on a kind of day to day basis. But if your sleep quality has really improved modestly but consistently over a 2 week period, you start to really notice the accumulation of those changes. And after about 2 weeks, you can say, wow, like this really feels good.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a really good point there. I think a lot of it could be placebo as well, right? It takes a while for you to think that it's actually making a difference, which is another big thing. My final kind of bit and piece I wanted to touch on was the concentration drug modafinil, because I know that modafinil is a big used thing in like Silicon Valley, and if you're a professional exec, you may have used this before. Late nights of work, study, that kind of thing. However, I've heard that it can have some negative impacts on sleep, and it really is just not good for your body in general. So, yeah, how does kind of modafinil impact sleep from what you've studied?
So I haven't studied this specifically, but we do see use of modafinil in clinical practice. I will say, at least with the patients in that we see in clinic, which is in Silicon Valley, right? I work at Stanford. It's like the heart of the kind of tech Bay Area. Um, we don't see a lot of people using modafinil inappropriately. And so inappropriately, I would say kind of using modafinil to get work done kind of late into the evening when you have too much work to do, right? So modafinil is a prescribed stimulant and it can interfere with sleep in the way that all stimulants can. If you're taking caffeine as a stimulant, if you're taking Adderall as kind of a stimulant or a recreational substance, right? These are all things that can interfere with sleep. So technically, modafinil shouldn't be prescribed unless you have sleep disorders that are otherwise treated. You're giving yourself enough time for sleep at night and you're feeling very sleepy during the day. Clearly, people can access different medications through different means and use them for different purposes, but I really wouldn't recommend using modafinil, which is a prescribed substance, as a tool to manage kind of day-to-day life and responsibilities. It really isn't how it's designed, and it can have a very significant negative impact on sleep.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you on that point as well regarding modafinil. I don't think it's something you should be taking with that prescription, and definitely not good for your health. I know that when you're taking modafinil and the effects on muscle building are not great as well. So if you guys are listening, it can impair your sleep, but it's also not the best for general muscle building from stuff that I've heard as well. So yeah, okay, great. And I know that I said that was the last question. I've got one more for you.
Sure.
Final one, because I love sleep and talking about it. The final one would be regarding deep and REM sleep. So I know that these are very important parts of the sleep cycle, and I know that if your goals are around productivity, concentration, highly efficient operating brain, and a strong physique and body, you want to get these latter stages of sleep. So how important do you think it is for people to get deep and REM sleep, and kind of how much should people be aiming for within kind of their sleep cycle?
So I think this is a really interesting question. And this actually comes up a lot. People often have a lot of questions about sleep trackers and what the data from their sleep tracker says and what this really means. And you're correct that deep sleep, which is also known as delta sleep or slow wave sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep, which is a separate type of sleep, are both really important to functioning and well being. Slow wave sleep or this deep sleep is this really restorative sleep period. A lot of regeneration occurs during this period. You have growth hormone that can be secreted during this period. So it's good for recovery. Rapid eye movement sleep is really important for consolidation and processing of memories, right? That's part of the reason why we have dreams in rapid eye movement sleep. This occurs more in the second half of the night. So many of us have had the experience of kind of waking up in the morning from a dream. That's part of why that happens. And both of these types of sleep are really important to overall well-being, functioning, and peak performance. Now, the question of how much should one be getting is a difficult one to answer because there's not really a lot that anyone can do about this amount of slow wave sleep or the amount of REM sleep that they're getting if they are overall sleeping well, right? So if someone comes in and they say, I feel pretty well rested during the day, my sleep quality is fine, but I really want to increase the amount of slow wave sleep that I get. Like, I don't really have a way to help you do that. Um, we don't have specific tools or medications that can promote these types of sleep at this point. There are some medications, some antidepressants that can have a REM suppressant effect. So you'll see someone will have less REM sleep when they're taking these types of medications. And, it's a clinical decision based on the symptoms that you're hoping to address with that medication, whether any of the potential impacts on sleep are worth that trade-off. When we're thinking of slow wave sleep, there's a little bit of data showing that kind of healthy exercise can help promote or deepen sleep or potentially get you a little bit more slow wave sleep. Um, but not to the extent that we really prescribe that to people as a way to improve those sleep stages. Really, from my perspective, what you want to do is to make sure that you are getting the best sleep that you can and protecting enough time for sleep so that your body can enter these deeper sleep stages, right? You're not so stressed heading into bedtime that you're bumping out of these different sleep stages when you get into them. You want to make sure that you are giving yourself enough time for sleep. So you're not trimming off that last rapid eye movement sleep cycle because you're waking up after 6 hours of sleep instead of after 8. These are the types of things that, again, sometimes feel very basic, but they can have a significant impact on the amount of sleep that you're getting.
For sure. That's super interesting. That makes a lot of sense. And I think just summarizing everything you've talked about today, you've kind of spoke in a way that's made sleep very simple. Like there's not so many hacks for it, right? It's just, a general healthy lifestyle, eating good, making sure you exercise, which, like you said, helps those little bits of sleep there, but generally being able to switch off, reducing stress, being mindful, looking at that holistic side of life will actually help with sleep. And there's no real kind of, hey, do this and you'll get 20% more sleep. It's like this, everything is connected. And the more that I talk to people on this podcast, the more I understand that, everything is connected, right? From your exercise to kind of how you spend the last half an hour of your night to, the food you put in your body, all of this is connected. And I think that you've touched on some great points today, Norah. So thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it was great to have you on.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to spread the word about the importance of sleep. I think we can't talk about it enough.
Amazing. And Norah, finally, where can people connect with you if they do want to get in contact with you regarding sleep or find any of your work online?
Sure. So I can be reached via email at nsimpson, like the TV show Simpson, at stanford.edu. Our program also has a website, which is insomnia.stanford.edu. And that talks some about our clinical work, also some about kind of our team profiles and connects to some of our research.
Amazing. Well, thank you for that, Norah. And again, appreciate you coming on. Best of luck with everything and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks. You as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Norah. That